Hello everyone, and welcome to the History Channel, a program dedicated to uncovering the most fascinating stories from the past. The U.S. military had prepared meticulously, from personnel selection to the deployment of troops for a daring mission to rescue prisoners of war. Every detail was timed to perfection. But then, just hours before the operation was set to launch, an unexpected message arrived. The prisoners had already been moved. So, how would the U.S. respond? Would they still go forward with the attack, or call it off? A few hours before the strike, American generals were in shock. They refused to believe their men had been transferred. A late-night emergency meeting was held to verify the intelligence and decide whether to proceed or abort the mission. First, they had to assess the credibility of the source. The information came from the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, based on a letter hidden inside a pack of Dien Bien cigarettes, written by Nguyen Van Hoang to Anne Fred. But was the intel reliable? And if not, how could they confirm it? Anne Fred was a member of the International Commission for Supervision and Control, ICSC, an organization created after the Geneva Accords to help mediate and monitor ceasefires. Operating between two sides, many members of the commission inevitably became spies, sometimes working for Vietnam, sometimes for the U.S., and occasionally for both. At that time, Anne Fred was a cunning operator who had been bribed by the U.S. to gather intelligence about American POWs in Vietnam. He befriended Nguyen Van Hoang under the classic pretense of mutual benefit. "I'll share classified information with you, if you share something valuable in return." Fred was shrewd. He often tested Hoang's trust with carefully crafted traps. As a professional intelligence officer, he knew that obtaining information was one thing, but verifying its accuracy and understanding the motives behind it was another. He would feed Hoang bits of bait. For example, a drunk American colonel accidentally revealed that a major attack would take place at this location on this date. Right on schedule, U.S. forces would then carry out the exact attack, just to see how Vietnam reacted. Before every strike, American reconnaissance watched closely. If Vietnamese troops seemed prepared and alert, they knew Hoang had believed Fred's tip. That meant Hoang now trusted him, and would likely share more sensitive secrets in return. During their final meeting before Fred returned home, he told Hoang that a promotion was waiting for him, if he could solve the mystery of the missing American POWs. Convinced, Hoang revealed that the prisoners had long been moved out of the Sơn Tây camp. Fred immediately relayed the news back to U.S. command. Only hours before the scheduled strike, panic swept through the Pentagon. A special meeting was called at the White House. On one hand, their intelligence said there were no POWs left. On the other, infrared images still showed human activity in the camp. Which one was true? No one knew for sure. In the end, they decided to take the risk. A vote was held, and every hand went up in favor of attacking. Everything proceeded according to plan. Had the POWs known what was coming, they would have rejoiced. After all, they'd been waiting for rescue for so long. Inside the camp, prisoners were allowed to exercise and talk freely, but under one strict rule: no English. They communicated only through tapping codes on the walls. It took forever to say a sentence, but it was safe. Before being relocated, the prisoners were blindfolded and placed in windowless trucks, bumping along rough roads, completely unaware of where they were headed. Still, they tried to observe everything they could, memorizing landmarks and sketching maps to somehow get a message out. At 11:18 p.m., the last helicopter lifted off from Udon Air Base, Thailand, heading toward Sơn Tây. Everything had been calculated down to the second. Arrival at 2:17 a.m. Just 30 seconds ahead of schedule, the exact moment they believed Vietnamese guards would be changing shifts. An AC-130 gunship was assigned to drop flares and blind the guards. While the helicopters landed for extraction, everything went perfectly, except one thing. The commander's helicopter got off course and landed at a school 400 meters away, injuring 2 soldiers. When the troops finally stormed the compound, they shouted into loudspeakers, "American prisoners, we're here to rescue you." But there was no answer. They swept through the rooms with flashlights, only to find 6 Vietnamese men. The camp guards, not prisoners. Realizing what had happened, the Americans opened fire to silence them. At that moment, the generals knew the mission had completely failed. Humiliated and furious, they counted the cost: $1 million helicopter destroyed for nothing. Ironically, one U.S. officer had previously suggested using A-1 helicopters, worth $350 each, instead of the expensive HH-3 models, costing $1 million. His advice was ignored. After the debacle, that suggestion became a bitter reminder of arrogance at the top. During the review, the generals insisted they had done everything right, even using infrared imaging alongside normal photos. But infrared couldn't tell the difference between a Vietnamese guard and an American POW. They'd even considered sending someone on a bicycle to scout the camp, but that idea was impossible. A foreigner would stand out, and no local could be trusted. In reality, Vietnam had already uncovered the U.S. plan, thanks to a CIA operative who had posed as a Red Cross inspector. Combined with domestic intelligence reports, the Vietnamese pieced together the full picture. They even set up decoy forces to mislead U.S. reconnaissance planes, making the camp appear still occupied. The real reason Vietnam relocated the POWs, however, had nothing to do with espionage. It was because of the CIA's secret weather manipulation project, which had caused massive flooding at Sơn Tây. The camp's walls were crumbling, and supply routes were washed out. Moving the prisoners was the only choice. The irony? That very secret project, codenamed Operation Popeye, was what doomed the entire rescue mission. The CIA had used silver and lead compounds to create artificial rain, hoping to bog down traffic along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. In 1970, they focused the operation over northern Vietnam, triggering record rainfall that even global meteorologists couldn't explain. According to reports, the rainfall in the 2 months before the raid nearly equaled 5 years' worth of storms combined. That's what forced Vietnam to move the prisoners, and what accidentally saved them from the U.S. attack. The Sơn Tây Raid proved that no operation, no matter how sophisticated, is ever flawless. In this case, the hunter was trapped by his own snare, a blunder that deeply embarrassed President Richard Nixon. He had no idea that it was the CIA's own weather experiment that sabotaged his mission. Through it all, the story highlights Vietnam's exceptional intelligence capabilities. Even a top-secret operation known only to Nixon and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger was somehow known to Vietnamese intelligence, as if they were America's second president. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the full story of the U.S. raid on the Sơn Tây prison camp. We hope you've enjoyed this fascinating look into one of the most secretive missions of the Vietnam War. Join us next time on History, where we'll explore how President Nixon changed the world. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 1 million supporters.